Up next, Shoulda, Coulda, Woulda. I only bought one release from a number of CCM artists. Was it enough, or do I regret not buying more from them? You'll find out coming up on Andrew's Journey in Christian Contemporary Music. Welcome to Andrew's Journey in Christian Contemporary Music, where we dive into the classics, discover what's new, and demonstrate the originals. If you're into all things Christian contemporary music, please consider subscribing by hitting that red button. And if you're liking what you're seeing, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Climb aboard, let's do the CCM journey together. Before I get started, I just want to mention that I have created a Spotify playlist called Dive into the Classics. In it are songs and or albums that I have mentioned in previous Dive into the Classics episodes, and will also include songs from the artists in this episode. The link to the Dive into the Classics playlists are in the description below. Regrets. We've all had them. Much of the time regrets can be rather unhealthy. But what about when it comes to the collector? Whether you collect sports memorabilia, rare coins, or music, I'm sure every collector has had their moments of regret for not making that one purchase. When I was preparing for my episode from a few weeks ago, my top 10 vocal groups, I came up with this idea, the idea for this episode, when I realized I only ever owned one release from the vocal band Take 6. What a shame, I thought. This got me thinking about the fact that I've only bought one release from a number of artists. Do I feel the same way with those artists as I do at Take 6? And from that came the idea for this episode. So today I've chosen 5 artists of whom I only owned one album, and we'll discuss why I regret it or why I don't. This exercise is a little tricky in terms of whether I'm going to take it from the perspective of back at that time when I would have been buying these albums, or from the perspective of what I know about the artist today. So the first 3 go back to when I was still buying vinyls. In fact, I purchased all these vinyls on the same day in a merch tent at a Christian music festival I was at in 1985. The first artist I'm going to discuss has the least amount of releases of the 5 artists. They only had 1 EP and 2 full-length albums. I bought their first full-length album from 1981. From the UK, 100% Proof. So their EP was from 1980, and then in 1983, they released the album Power and the Glory, and that was it. That was their catalog. Now, they'd been compared to AC/DC, but I think it's mostly because of a song on here called The Loner, which is a song about AC/DC's former vocalist Bon Scott. But I'd say I would compare these guys more to like George Thorogood, Bad Company, that kind of blues rock sound. Now, there's a couple of songs on here that I like, but otherwise, I don't really regret not tracking down the other releases. It's not really, and never has really been a go-to album for me. So that's the first one. No regrets here for 100% Proof. The second artist released 12 albums over his career. He performed at the festival where I purchased these vinyls. The album I picked up was his second release from 1983. He is Rick Kua, and the album is No Mystery. Now, No Mystery is a solid pop rock album. There's a couple of songs that I don't really care for, but the rest of the album's pretty good. At the time, only his debut release, Kua, and his third album, You're My Road, were out. I saw them both for sale, but never pulled the trigger on them. I later also saw his 1986 release, Wear Your Colors, where I thought the album cover looked kind of pretty cool, the way he was standing there with his bass. But in all cases, I never purchased any of them, which I regretted at the time. Today, in hindsight, I don't really play this album all that much, and I don't know if I really regret not having bought them, because I'm not sure if I really would have bought or listened to the others any more than I did this one. So that's my second one, Rick Kua, No Mystery. Now the third artist might be a bit of a surprise to some. Now, that is, if you're familiar with my prior episodes and you kind of know what I was listening to at the time that I came to know the Lord. These guys were actually at the festival in 1985 where I purchased these albums. And they had just released their first full-length album. But when I was in the merch tent, I picked up their first album, which was an EP. They were the headliner on the first night, and I had not even heard of them until I saw them play. And I thought, wow. I went to the merch tent and bought the Yellow and Black Attack from Stryper. Now, this is the original 6-song EP that actually came with the bonus 12-inch single, Reason for the Season, the Christmas song, with Winter Wonderland on the flip side. Now, when I first got this, I played this a lot. I even put it, transferred it over on a cassette and listened to it on my Walkman. But as my tastes mellowed out and my history with hair metal and glam metal kind of was short-lived, I wasn't really interested in buying any more albums from Stryper at the time. Now, Stryper, of course, would become massively successful, especially with their album To Hell with the Devil, which went platinum in the US and gold in Canada. I remember hearing some of their big hits like Free and Honestly, but still wasn't really interested in going back to them. At the time, I didn't regret not buying more of their albums. However, what I do regret is that I didn't keep checking back with them just to see what they were up to. Now, I think a lot of fans in their early albums anyway, I can't speak to the stuff that came out when they got back together, but it seems like Soldiers Under Command or To Hell with the Devil seems to be the albums that most fans go to with their early stuff. But I later on discovered the 1990 album Against the Law, which I think I would have considered picking up. It was less of the glam and hair metal and more old school hard rock early metal with a little bit of Van Halen-ish flair to it. I haven't really dove into Stryper stuff since they reunited in the 2000s. My hope is that I'll get caught up on those works and do a deep dive and maybe even do a video, an episode maybe comparing the stuff from the 80s to their more recent stuff. But I do find it amazing that since they've been back together, they've actually put out more albums than when they were first together in the 80s. This is very impressive. Moving on to my number 4 artist, we look at a female artist. I remember watching her video for the song Here in My Heart and really liking her pop country sound. However, it wasn't the album that song was on that I would buy, which was her second album, Angels of Mercy, from 1992. Instead, we ended up purchasing the 1996 release, A Distant Call. I'm talking about Susan Ashton. I loved this album. You Move Me, Blindside, Body and Soul, the extremely catchy All Kinds of People, Crooked Man, great songs. We had it on cassette and we gave it away to someone who we thought could be encouraged by it. And I really regret not having gone out and got another copy or maybe finding it on CD. And I certainly regret not tracking down some of her earlier releases. I've gone back and listened to some of Susan's earlier material on YouTube and Spotify, and there is some great stuff, especially her debut album, Wakened by the Wind, and her third self-titled release. Now there's a connection between Susan Ashton and the final artist I'm going to talk about, as Susan did 2 collaborative albums with the female half of this husband and wife team. Of course, I'm talking about Christine Dente and her husband Scott, otherwise known as Out of the Grey. If you watch my favorite albums by decade episode, you might remember that I mentioned Out of the Grey's Gravity as an honorable mention in my favorite albums of the 1990s. Why I never bought any of their other albums is beyond me. The debut album, Shape of Grace, Diamond Days, even the albums that followed Gravity. Christine is one of my favorite female vocalists. And Scott is a very underrated guitar player. And he's also no slouch vocally. Terrific songwriting, often with producer Charlie Peacock, and great arrangements and production. As I mentioned earlier, Christine collaborated with Susan Ashton on 2 albums. The first one was with Margaret Becker called Along the Road. The second was with Michelle Toombs called Lost in Wonder, Voices of Worship. Not to be outdone, Scott Dente collaborated with Wes King and Phil Keaggy with a heavy guitar-driven project called Invention. I've got that one. 4 of the tracks have vocals, but the rest is all instrumental. It's a great album, one of my favorites. And that's it. I really wish I had got more Out of the Grey for sure. But I want to hear from you. I want to hear your stories, your albums that you only bought one of by an artist and have regrets, or maybe you didn't regret. Maybe you even gave that one album away because you didn't like it at all. But I'd love to hear from you. So if you want to just give me a comment, I'd love to hear your stories. Let me know. Regrets? No regrets. And that is it for today. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. We'll see you next time on Andrew's Journey in Christian Contemporary Music. So long, God bless, bye for now.